if you can, step into your power and go to the police to report what happened. At the same time, this is going to be very difficult to do. But at the same time, detach yourself from the outcome of what that means and what will happen, because that is outside your control. What is inside your control is going to the police and say, this happened to me X amount of years ago.
Hello, everyone. I do want to start today's episode with a trigger warning. We will be discussing sexual violence, abuse, and so make sure you are taking care of yourself and make sure that you are utilizing your resources. If at any point in today's episode you need to pause and stop and come back to it or not, it's up to you. There's nothing right or wrong. Just be taking care of yourself and dealing with things and healing in your own time. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm your host, and I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, and publisher, and I am passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and build a beautiful future. And today, I am so thrilled to be joined by a guest, Perry Power, who is doing exactly that. Not only for himself, but Perry Power is doing that for so many other people through the amazing work he's doing. Perry is a survivor of childhood abuse and an advocate for other survivors and victims. I call him an actor, author, and activist. He's like a AAA threat, right? He does everything. Perry has authored his own book, Breaking the Silence: Stories from Survivors of Sexual Abuse. And he also helps people reclaim their stories by helping them write and publish work about their challenges and their triumphs on their path to recovery. He has started a movement called the Power Tribe, which we will discuss more about today. I'm excited to learn about that and how you can be a part of that if that's of interest to you. And he is active in charities to help victims as well, including We Rescue Kids and We Together. Perry, thank you so much for joining us here on Talks with Dr. Shafer.
Dr. Shafer, thank you for the lovely welcome. And by the way, you got a great voice. Really good voice.
Thank you.
Yes. Nice. It's a good podcasting voice, good ebooking, good meditation voice. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. In a former life, I was a musician. I was a singer-songwriter. So it might just be from training. And in your life, you are an actor and you're also an incredible speaker and connector and storyteller. Tell us your story about what brought you to this place where you are not only an author and actor, but an activist.
Well, it goes back to when I was 11 years old and I was at my nan's house and I was in the living room and I was on my step-granddad's lap who was watching TV. I can't remember what we was watching, but I know we used to watch Eggheads a lot. Yeah, I don't think you guys have Eggheads. I think it's very British. It's like an old show. Whereas like we have modern day versions of it now, and you guys will have modern day versions of it. But it's just like a panel of people, very smart people, and they got to answer these very like crazy smart people questions, you know. And for some reason, I used to watch that and get the answers right. Don't ask me how. No idea. But I was on his lap, and my stepmom was sitting on the sofa opposite. So me and my step-granddad are watching TV. My stepmom's on the other side watching TV. And then out of the corner of her eye, she sees a cigarette butt drop out of his hand onto the carpet. So in that short moment, she doesn't take much of it. She's like, I'm guessing he would just lean down and pick the cigarette up, because why wouldn't you? But then moments go by and he's not. And she's looking at it and she can see that it's starting to burn like a small hole in the carpet. And then she looks up and then she sees movements that just sort of make the hairs on the back of her neck go up. And then she stands up. She doesn't know what to do. She leaves, goes into the kitchen, and then calls me as if like she needed me for something. And then she pulls me into the kitchen. Now, I don't remember any of this. And she pulls me into the kitchen, and then she takes me home. So she obviously says something to me, but I don't know what she said. But then she takes me home, and then she tells my dad. And then my dad, in my dad's fashion of things, he confronted me. like
Mm.
more like an angry, confrontational way, and asked me about what
Mhm.
happened. And then I told him about what happened, and he said, basically, you're not going to go around there again. All right, you're not going to see them again. You're not going to go around there. Don't tell anybody about what happened. Don't tell your mother, my biological mum. Don't tell her. Don't tell your friends at school. Don't tell anyone. You're going to keep this in the
Mhm.
four walls of this house. We don't want a black cloud over the family name. And I remember
Mm.
that. I remember him telling me that in the kitchen. But here's the thing that, and I do think to a certain degree, it helps me do what I've done now. Like there's many people that come and go in advocacy work. And
Mm.
that's not shaming or saying anything, because one days of
Mhm.
advocacy work is fantastic, right? Just 1 day, 1 hour, doesn't matter. You're doing
Yes.
something to help someone else. That's all that matters. It's just more of an awareness thing that people do come, they'll spend a couple of months, maybe a year, maybe a couple of years, and then they quote unquote leave because it's too much. The whole life is around
Mm.
abuse. And I get that. And
Yeah.
I get that. And that's not me. I grew up, my biological mom left when I was 4 or 5 years old. And my auntie, who's like a mum to me, she would be the one that would drop me off and pick me up from school, and I'll stay around hers for a while, for a few hours every day, until then my parents come and pick me up. She was always there for me. She still is. But my auntie is the queen of dark documentaries.
Mm.
She loves true murder, true crime. She bloody loves all of it. And I'm
Mhm.
always been there as a kid, being like, I don't want to see someone get murdered. I don't, with all
Mm.
due respect, right now in this given moment in time, I don't care about Sally that got murdered and then they did a documentary about it. Like, I just, I wanna live a happy life, And
Right.
and that's not to say that those documentaries aren't happy, because my girlfriend now, she loves them. And she's like, no, I love it. It's great. I'm like, I just can't. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because for me, the world of abuse, there's a connection to that. I see the world of abuse in a
Mhm.
similar way to watching these dark documentaries. It's very doom and
Yes.
gloom,
Yes.
you know? And so, one, I approach this in a completely different way to most advocates.
Mhm.
And I think that allows me to, I've been doing this now since the beginning of 2018, so 6 years. 6 years. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And
Mhm.
that, and also the abuse that I went through, uh, wasn't, what's the best way to say it? The abuse that I went through didn't trigger me in a way that a lot of other people have been through abuse. Like when I went through it,
Mm.
I didn't know it was wrong. At the time, I
Mhm.
enjoyed it.
Mhm.
Really, the issues come in the silence. The issues came when there was shame. The
Right.
issue for me, abuse is wrong, but the issue for me wasn't in the abuse, is what happened after the abuse. So I can
Mhm.
talk about the abuse in the same way I can talk about how I make a cup of coffee,
Mhm.
right? And then that allows me to show up in the way that I do and empower people to be like, hey, listen, you don't need to live back then. It's not who
Mhm.
you are, it's what you went through. And you don't have to become an advocate and help other people and share your story. You don't have to. There's great healing in sharing your story. But more so, you don't need to be that person. It can just be part of your makeup, but you can use that, turn that pain into purpose, turn that pain into power. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what, in a nutshellish way, what allows me to do what I do now.
Well, and that's so impactful to share, and it really resonates with me, and my goal with my show and the work I do in coaching is trying to empower people to really take stock of their story and reclaim it and release the things that happened to them that they took on as a part of them that never were. They were something that happened to them that affects them, but they can learn how to take the lessons from that and move forward. And they don't have to take on the action that isn't who they are and take ownership of it, because when they're focusing their energy on that, they're not focusing their energy on taking ownership of their life. When you're driving a car, if you look back, you're going to turn the wheel, right? So you can't move forward if you're always looking over your shoulder. The natural way that we respond to that is if we look back, our focus is backward. And so we look back, we learn the lessons, and now how are we going to focus our energy forward? And I was so inspired. The way I actually first learned about you and your story and the work you do was, I was telling you before the show, I was doom scrolling on Instagram and I came across one of your very, very powerful reels, and it just stopped me in my tracks. And I just really wanted to share the work you're doing because it is the perfect example of once you really, through your story, and I'd love you to share a bit about how you came to this point, because there was a time in your life where you hadn't processed it, right? You hadn't reclaimed it, you hadn't moved forward, and then now you have. And once you do that and you aren't spinning your wheels stuck in the mud anymore, but you have forward momentum, what you can do with that energy is just will blow your mind. It's more than you ever could have thought was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily get to the point where they take ownership of that story. The story takes ownership of them in a way.
Yeah.
And, we'll find out in a moment. But that was my dad. So my dad became, what happened to him in a way became my purpose. I think a lot of times the purpose finds us rather than we find the purpose. Or the purpose is always there, but we just got to like remove that invisible cloak or open up that door for it to then appear, or give ourselves permission to actually lean into it. But for me, it happened where one day I was on YouTube and I see a video by Ellen DeGeneres interviewing Lewis Howes. And at that time, he brought out a new book. And the book was his Mask of Masculinity book. And she said to him about, why did you write the book? Why have you done this? And he said, because he went through abuse as a child and he grew up wearing these different masks in order to fit in. And I think maybe it's just divine timing, or maybe it was the way he articulated it. Because prior to that, it's not like the abuse was on my mind at the sort of level of I need to speak out. It was just there in the background like it always was. But something just happened with that interview where it made me realize what I had been doing. And to put it very short, the actor in me, when I moved out of London and moved to a new location, the actor in me created a new version of Perry Power that people, it'd be the first time. Like when I was in London, I was sort of this kid who knew that he went through abuse. There was shame there, and that shame then spilled out into not knowing how to talk to girls, but I wanted to talk to girls. And, in my group then, as being a young London boy, I wanted to be a player, right? A lot of American Pie films, right? I wanted to be a player. And I couldn't say anything to anyone. I couldn't even say hello. And I didn't want to be that guy. So when I moved to this new location, I was like, right, this is Perry Power in college who slept with loads of girls. All a lie. Slept with loads of girls. He doesn't care about anything. He's going to turn up to class whenever he wants to. He doesn't need to be on time. Doesn't give a fuck. Attitude type of thing. And that was the character that I started to play. Anyway, now if we fast forward back to that time, what I realized is I just created new masks.
Absolutely.
And in that moment, I was a personal trainer at the time. And in that moment, I said to myself, right, now that I'm aware of this, am I just going to sit with it and do nothing about it? Or am I actually going to do something about it? And I was like, well, it's going to be the latter. Okay, so what am I going to do? Well, I don't know what the options are. The only option that's coming to me is just one, which is tell your girlfriend. And this is my ex-girlfriend now, my girlfriend at the time. Tell her. So I wait for her to come home. We went out for a walk with our dog. And then I ended up telling her. I don't remember what I said, but I remember how I felt. And just felt like I was stark bollock naked. Everyone was staring at me, freezing cold. And that's how it felt. Brene Brown says it all the time, that vulnerability is like, standing outside naked and everyone's just staring at you. And that's just basically how it felt.
Yeah.
But what then happened, which is very interesting, is, sometimes we do things that then force us outside our comfort zone. And I believe that there's a certain time period where that comfort zone has increased in size. And if we don't do something else, if that comfort zone then starts to shrink again back to what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think we constantly have to step to continue increasing that size. Because if we don't, it just goes back to what it was. Maybe a little size increase, but nothing much. In the grand scheme
I
of things, it's the
agree.
same. So
Mm-hmm.
what happened was I went to a business retreat because I was an in-person personal trainer. I wanted to move online. This is now we're talking. When I told my girlfriend then, that was the end of 2017. Now we're talking about the beginning of 2018. And I went to this mastermind in-person retreat about how to move your business online, start an online coaching business. And in that setting of the first day where everyone goes around the room and introduces themselves, people are like, yeah, I got a I got a fitness business helping blah, 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 blah. For me, I just said, I went for abuse and I just came out of it. Didn't plan it. Again, don't remember what I said, but I know that I said it, but I don't remember the words that I used. I remember how I felt. And that 3-day, I think it was a 3-day mastermind event, really was because everyone there was way ahead of me in the game. So that helped me really to keep that comfort zone expanded. And then where everything changed was when I was driving home from the event 3 days after that. 3 days after the first day, I was driving home from the event. And I'm saying to myself, right, comfort zone has grown. I'm aware of this. I don't want it to shrink back. So what am I going to do? I need to go onto social media and talk about this story. That's just the idea that came to me, that voice. And I was like, oh, jeez. I was like, okay, fine. I'll do it. I'll do it when I get home. I was like, good idea. I'm driving. And then the same voice that said go onto social media then said, but you won't do it when you get home because you'll get home. Then your girlfriend will say, how did the mastermind event go? Then you'll talk about that. She's got her friends around. So then you're going to mingle with her friends so you don't seem rude. And then all of a sudden, now you've just created probably another reason why maybe you should do it tomorrow because you're about to go out for dinner. Right? So then I pulled my car over and then took the phone out. It took me 7 takes, recorded a video, 17 minutes long, put it onto Facebook. And then I remember just being like, what am I doing? I saw that there was like 60 something, I did a video, put my phone down, staring out a window, just contemplating life. And then I went back onto the video, there was 60 something views, 2-3 comments. But then I'm like 2-3 comments. So that means everyone else has watched it, not left the comment. And then basically in that moment, what was being shown to me was my internal world, that shame. I'm being shamed now because all those people have watched it but I haven't responded. So what are they thinking? And nothing positive was coming out. It's just a reflection of my own internal fears.
Right.
And then I was gonna delete the video, but in that moment, I just threw the phone into the back of my car, forced myself into action to override the thoughts, and then just started reversing the car. Drove home. When I went home, the video had blown up, and basically, then I went a couple of weeks later. I went to my auntie's house, and she's like, "Oh, I watched the video," and I said, "Okay, yeah." And she's like, well, at first, actually, I went to my family home. My stepmom said, I've watched a video. And in that moment, I was like, oh, of course my family are going to see this. Then I was embarrassed.
Right.
And she said, I didn't know the abuse went on for however long. I just thought it was just that one time and I caught it. And I said, no, because I don't even remember that. I remember being abused by my stepfriend. I remember different things that happening. But I don't remember what she said. That's her story telling me. So it definitely happened more than that. Right. And then I went to my auntie's house and then she said, you weren't the only one that was abused. And I said, well, I know that me and my cousin Kelly, who's my auntie's daughter, who was there because they lived together. She's like 5-6 years older than me. I always knew about her abuse. She had it for a long time compared to me. She had it for a long time. And I said, yeah, me and Kelly. She said, it wasn't just you two. She said, it was your dad as well. And then that's when everything just clicked into place. Why my dad told me to stay silent, why he shut me down every time I brought it up, why he told me to watch the Spotlight film and told me about the have you seen Spotlight?
No, but I've heard you discuss it in other interviews. It's on my list now. Tell the listeners about the impact of this film and how your dad asked you to watch it and then tried to connect with you over this film.
Yeah, one day, very randomly, my dad said to me, "You should watch Spotlight." And I was like, "Okay, what's it about?" And he said, "It's about, basically, in a nutshell, it's about this team of news reporters in Boston back in, I can't remember the year, I think it's 2001 or something, who basically caught wind of this case of a priest molesting a kid. But then all of a sudden it was covered up. So it started off with like this one rogue reporter who had his purpose in life and wanted to get to the bottom of it, and everyone says, don't do it, don't do it. And she pushes through, and then all of a sudden inspires other rogue reporters to come together and create a team to actually go after this. And then what they ended up discovering was that there's loads of cases that have been covered up, not just in Boston, but then all around the world. And my dad told me to watch this. And so I watched it, and then sometime later I go back to him and said, I've watched it. Powerful film. And he said to me, I remember this, it was in the car, and he said, at the end of the film, before the credits, I said, yeah. He goes, they show a listing of all of the places in America, like the actual institutions, but then outside of America is like just the cities around the world where they've had reportings from Catholic churches and institutions. I said, yeah. And he goes, well, Cork in Ireland is listed. I said, okay. And he goes, that's where your step granddad was raised, and he went to a Catholic institution there. And I remember just being like, oh. I was like, it makes sense then, right? And as soon as I said that, my dad flipped. He's like, it doesn't fucking make sense. And he gets out of the car and slams the car door shut. And I remember in that moment, like, it's an interesting reaction. Not making any connection to him and his story. Just like, why is he gonna? I was the one that was bloody abused. What you getting all mad about? You know. So it made sense why he told me to watch that, and it made sense why he then became an alcoholic, and why unfortunately he passed away at the age of 48.
And then you found out the connection you had with him after he passed.
After he passed away, yeah. So he passed away June the 1st, 2017, and then his sister, my auntie, told me at the beginning of 2018.
About his history of sexual abuse.
Correct. Yeah. Not in. She just said that he was abused. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The only thing, I don't know any details. I don't know. I know nothing about my dad's story about the abuse. The only thing I do know, which then was another surprise. I don't actually think I've said this yet. But my brother, a couple of years, said to me that our dad told him once upon a time when he was drunk that my step granddad tried to do something to him, and my dad it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Enough was enough, and my dad pushed him up against the wall, and he said, if you ever touch me again, I'll kill you. And apparently he never touched my dad again. That's the only thing that I know about their story. Yeah.
It's the thing that really impacts me when you're sharing all of these interconnected stories and experiences and all of the emotions that kind of bubble to the surface and then go back down underneath the surface, is how the shame and blame that happens when we tell our stories in spaces that aren't safe can then push us back into that space of isolation and hurt us on our healing period. And it's not necessarily because the person we're hoping to share with has malintent for us or doesn't want the best for us. They're at a different place in their story and their healing journey. We often have no idea the demons that they're facing every day. And I love how you've spoken before about the power of journaling and writing as a potential way to start to tell your story so that you're in a safe space, you're in a place where you can start to process it, and then you have reclaimed it and you have a relationship with your truth such that once you choose a space to share your story, it remains your story, and someone else's response to it or reaction to it is not going to affect your opinion of yourself and your experience.
Yeah, exactly. even though I broke my silence to my girlfriend at the time when we did that walk, I tell people now to don't follow what I done, because she could have, in that very moment, even though I trusted her, and I think sometimes it's not about whether you trust them or not, because like you said there, she could have had the most well intentions, but she could have paused for a moment too long to just think about how she should respond to me, and I could have completely read that in a different way. She could have given advice that she thought would have been right, but was not what I needed to hear in that moment. So there's too much on it. There's too much. I was just very lucky that whatever response she gave to me was fine. Very lucky. Because if she gave me some type of response where I felt rejected, I would have gone back into silence, because the only time that I was truthful, I was rejected. Now I associate truth with rejection.
Right.
So I tell people that what you need to do is you need to break the silence to yourself first in as many different ways as possible, until you get to the point where you don't feel like you need validation from anyone, and you don't need them to believe you, because you believe you validate you know what you went through, you're in your power. When you're telling someone because you're choosing to, not because you feel like you have to.
Yes. Yes. You're sharing your story in a safe space with someone who has in a way earned the right to hear that story. Not everyone has earned the right to your story, and if you share it in spaces where it won't be received in the way you're trying to share it, that can be really damaging, especially when you're in the early stages of healing. And I want to say, I think it's really important in this process that you help people with encouraging them to write their stories. It's important to set expectations when we're healing, because I think, again, shame and blame, when we listen to a podcast, read a book, hear a story, and it inspires us, but then we wake up the next day or we meet our next life challenge a few days or weeks later, and our nervous system kicks in, our fight or flight response kicks in, we go back into that trauma trigger response. We're like, oh my goodness, well, look, here I thought I was healed, and I feel like I'm 3 steps back. We shame ourselves, and that can take us back on healing. So I think having expectations of how long that journey takes, we're talking years on average, to form a new mindset, a new way of thinking. Understanding that to start can help avoid that feeling of shame and blaming yourself for not excelling at healing and falling back into that space of rejection.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think I think the whole healing thing, the healing world, I think is very interesting. I don't have a solid opinion yet. And I was saying this on our group call yesterday, that this Deborah, who published the book It Ends With Me, she came to the call and she basically said that she wants to go to what they called homeless shelters. She wants to go to homeless shelters. She said, because a lot of times, like things like AA meetings, things like homeless shelters, places that get people in that are at a relatively low point in their life, or to have bad coping mechanisms, it all usually comes from a place of trauma. Their trauma responses. Down the road, it then leads them to that unfortunate point. And so she's like, so I know that there's going to be many women there who have been through trauma, who will relate to my story and relate to the book that I've written. She's like, I have this fear that if I go there and do a talk, if I go there and give out my book, that I won't be able to bring them the healing that they're seeking, and I think that she's got this sort of fear, and one could call it, I guess, imposter syndrome too, that she's not going to bring them the healing that they need, and she's going to be in and out of her depths. Like when they say, okay, great, Deborah, great talk, but how do I heal? And I said to her in that moment, I said, this is the tricky thing about the whole healing space. I said, because everyone is different. And I said, if you then preach the way that everyone is going to find healing and what they're doing is wrong, they need to do this, then that's fine, but it can be very dangerous waters. I said, all you can do is just say what worked for you. So, like, for me personally, I've never identified with the word healing. I've never like been on a healing journey. I've just, broke my silence, and then I was like, cool, all right, let's launch a publishing company. I've never gone out there, and I do, I guess, to a certain degree, have a belief that if you are constantly looking for wounds to heal, you're always going to find wounds to heal, because what you focus on grows. But if you instead focus on a version of yourself that you want to become, then what you'll find is that not all, but a lot of healing will happen as a byproduct of that. So, but everyone, like I said, everyone is different, and the end goal, all we care about is the end goal. Live the life that you want to live, be empowered, have boundaries, and be happy. How you get there, there's a million different paths. Try them all, and you'll eventually find one that works.
That is so well said. If you're not hurting anyone and you're on your path, there's no wrong way to do it. There's no need to shame or blame yourself. I love that. And it makes me think about, I think my question I have is, when you look back with your focus on growth, which is incredibly important, and not focusing on healing, but just focusing on growth, and you look back at how you respond to challenges now and to stressors and things that maybe would have triggered you 6 years ago, do you feel that healing has occurred through that growth?
I think if I look back to times where I've been triggered, I think that's the only way I can answer this, is that I've never been triggered by, I hear people's stories, it's my full-time gig, 24/7. All I do is, I don't really, at the moment at least, I don't really have a life outside of what I do. I'm in the depths of trauma survivor stories all day, every day. Not just because of the company that I run, but also because of the social media following that I have, and activity and DMs, and as well as the charity. And I don't get triggered by anyone's stories. It gets to a point where it pisses me off because of the injustice. But it doesn't mess me up. And so when it comes to that side of things, I can't think back to any triggers. The only triggers that come to my mind straight away is abandonment. When my ex left me, it just absolutely ruined me. And it made me sort of see that, and I don't have all the answers. I like to think that I'm self-aware, but can we ever say we're fully 100% self-aware? I have no idea. But I know that when she left, it was a complicated relationship. So I think that had something to do with it. But definitely when she left, I felt like, okay, there's a problem here, because that triggered like the darkest year of my life. And I'm still aware now. I definitely have a tendency to bury myself into work, not from a point of I do it consciously to not confront things, because I'm an emotional guy. I very much feel things and do things and what have you. But for example, here's the best way to explain it, is that June the 1st, so when was that? 2 days ago? 3 days ago. 3 days ago was my dad's anniversary of his death, 7 years. And every year, my stepmom posts on social media like a post saying, missing you, Andy, and whatever. And she tags me. I never like it. Well, sometimes I do, but I hardly like it, hardly comment, hardly do my own thing. Post, like, and that's usually because on that day I'm with someone, usually my girlfriend, or, it's been 7 years, maybe an ex-girlfriend, but I was with someone where I can not think about it and just focus on my girlfriend or focus on working. But this year, my girlfriend wasn't here and I was on my own. And I always had a dog. So I never felt alone when I had my dog. My dog that I had, Amara, she was very much like my right arm. And when she passed away the next day, I went to my auntie's house So surrounding myself with people.
Mhm.
And this Saturday, just the first, I think it's a Saturday, whenever it was, she wasn't here. And to begin with, I was fine. But as the day went on, what I would push behind forced its way to the front. And I had a terrible day. Terrible day. So what I will say is that when it comes to things of that nature, maybe that's abandonment, maybe that is just grief and not confronting the grief. Uh,
Mm.
I haven't fully confronted it yet.
Mhm.
So there's still areas of myself that I need to work on. But here's the thing: is like I don't like spend all of my time like, okay, how can I now just focus on grief? And then once I've done the grief, okay, what's the next thing of myself that I need to heal? It's I've gone on a growth journey, and then that popped up, brought me a terrible time. I'm like, oh, I'm aware of it. Now let's try and sort that
Mhm.
out while still growing.
Mhm.
You know?
Mhm. No, absolutely. I can really relate to that. And one of the phrases that I use to describe that experience. So for me, when I was really trying to grow my mindset and really change it and start to change my focus and really reclaim my own life, my own story, when I was early on in that process, there was a lot of triggering going on. And I think when you are not focused on growth and on what I call healing, when you feel those triggers, it's almost like touching a hot stove. You touch it and you move away. Like that hurts. Avoid it. But physical pain is that way, yes, but mental pain is quite the opposite. I call it a trigger detector because if you're on the beach and you're looking for, metal, like some people do with their metal detector, and you hear it beep beep beep, that's where you want to pay attention, right? That's sending you an important signal. That's what you need to pay attention to. And I learned how, just like you said, when you felt triggered, when you felt those emotions and you wanted to hide from them, to not hide from them, but really pay attention to them, not get lost in them, but try to grow through addressing them. And I love how you talk about that you're not basically going to sit with them, right? You're not going to snuggle them and make them your whole life, but you're going to be aware of them. They're in the room with you, and you're going to find ways to cope over time. And
Exactly.
that is a realistic way of learning how to cope with our emotions when they boil up, and not just stuff them in a box, because they're going to come out, and they can either come out in a controlled way where you're in control of your emotions and your story,
Mm.
or they can come out in a way that's destructive. And hearing your story and how you have what you have created to help yourself, to help you stay focused on growth, and how that then bubbles over to helping other people. It's so inspiring, and I think it shows people that what has happened to them has gifts and lessons. It doesn't
Yeah.
only have pain. And you can take the lessons and move forward just like you have.
There's so many lessons in there. So many lessons for every single person who's gone through trauma. There's so many lessons in there, but we just don't see it because it's just drowning in the pain, and it's
Mm-hmm.
the pain that we're not, it's the we're on the beach with that metal detector and we hear the sound and we just drop it and we just run away, you
Yeah,
know. And once we do, like you said, once we hear the beep 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 and we handle it, we sort it out in whatever way that looks, then we'll find the gems. We'll find that purpose.
exactly. It's hidden in the sand, but you've gotta dig for it. You've got to find
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And so let's talk about your process of not only how you've done that for yourself and growing your business and growing yourself as a person, but also how you're helping other people on their journey.
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts. So the first part, I mentioned it earlier about breaking the silence to yourself first in as many different ways as possible. And then when you feel ready to, and you will just naturally will feel ready to, whatever point that is, whether it's point 4 or point
Mm.
19, you know, uh, then tell someone else in a control setting, and then you'll naturally, intuitively will be in your path. That's the first part, and that's kind of like the power tribe, the movement, the whole message behind it is to break the silence. And then we have the other part, which is, okay, are you ready to transform your life? Are you ready to, whether it's healing or it's helping others or it's both? And that's what my publishing company is, Powerful Books. And it's more than just a publishing company. It's a healing, growth, and transformational program that we run. And we provide that through the process of, when I first started it, I first started Powerful Books because of my big vision. My big vision is Powerful Pictures, and it's to have a movie production company that makes true story films. And I was like, okay, well, how can I generate my own films, my own content? And then I was like, Powerful Books. All right. Because now if I help survivors write true story books, then there'll be a select number of those books that then we can transform into films later on down the road.
Right.
So it started off as a publishing company, but as any businessman would tell you, businesswoman would tell you, if they have a company that's doing something, is that oftentimes how you first started it won't be what it ends up being. And it started off as a publishing company, and then I had the first person tell me, hey Perry, I've had more healing doing this program than in the last 10 years of counseling. And I was like, that's interesting. And then someone else, and then someone else, and then someone else said more healing in 40 years, right? More healing in 4 weeks than she got in 40 years. That one just blew my head. I didn't plan for any of this. It's just, I created a process to help people. Like, what we do is we basically help people go from a blank page to a published book in 3 to 6 months. That's what we help people do.
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
We provide the framework. We basically, it's like, so many people are like, where do I even start with my story? Like, what do I even do with this? And a lot of times people will attempt to maybe write something down, but then they'll word vomit, and then they'll hit a brick wall. Where do I go from here? Do I include family details? Do I not? Is my story too big for a book? Is it too small for a book? And what we do is we have a very specific process, which is like, there's a lot of work you need to do before you even start writing the book. And we call it the Powerful Story Framework. It's 3 steps. The first one is clarify your story. So let's unravel your story to see where the dots connect. Let's see how your intuition guides you throughout this process. Then, what's your message? So what's the message that's been born from your story that makes you who you are today? And then what is the book structure? What does it look like? What sort of chapters? What's the message of each chapter? Now you have your own blueprint that you've created. Now you start draft 1, but you know how you're starting, you know where you're going. And that's what allows them to do a book in 3 to 6 months. And once they've done that, like I said, we're more than just writing a book. We're also more than just a healing part, because inside Powerful Books, we have like how to be a speaker, how to go viral on social media, because it's not, people join to write a book and then they very quickly realize why they joined in the first place. And that is because, yes, they want to find healing, but as a byproduct of, they just want to help. Well, they say they want to help other people. A lot of times they want to help themselves vicariously through helping someone else. But it's helping someone else. And usually, if I say, you probably heard this, been in the world of marketing, that if you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. If you speak to one person, you speak to everyone. And it's the same thing when you're writing a book. They're like, yeah, but I can write my book, I can help people with, I'm like, no. Yes, you can. And they might all read your book. But you're going to write your book to one person, and 99.9% of the time, that person that you're writing the book for and to is the past version of you. So therefore, you know what their pain points are. You know what their fears are. Write the book to the past version of you. And then when they go through that process, naturally they're like, okay, what else can I do with my story? How else can I help other people? And I say, like, people in the program, they say, Perry, you're going to help me with marketing. I said, publishing companies, they'll run a marketing campaign for you, to do all that sort of stuff. I'm like, this is not what we do.
Right.
I help you learn the skill set to market your own story. Because you don't market the book, you market your story, and if you do that well enough, the book will sell as a byproduct of that. as well as getting
Exactly.
talking engagements, as well as getting asked to be a trustee on chair of a charity, as well as this, as well as that. So,
Hmm.
and that whole process, along with the community, because a lot of people before joining, they've been on their own with their story. They're the only one that they know about that was abused by their dad, for example.
Mm.
But then they join a community of loads of people all around the world. They come on a call, and we're talking about being abused by our dad as if like someone else talks about, dropping a kid off at school type of thing.
Right.
And they're like, this is crazy. I.e., there's no shame. I.e., there's no fear because it's a safe space. And that's what makes them understand that what they've been through is more common than they realize. And that's when their self-confidence starts to pick up. And then that's when they actually start to see and hear the voice that they have within themselves.
That is so incredibly powerful. I'm so floored. And I think that people like yourself who are focusing their energy on creating safe spaces for others are truly the future of our world and on making society a safer place for everyone. This is so critically important. And I am just so appreciative of having this conversation with you and of all the work you're doing. I just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I appreciate that. No, I do. I do appreciate that. And I think that the more that we are just open with our stories, it would just inspire other people to do the same. And it's like, if all of us can be leaders, and create safe spaces, then you best believe this world is changing within our lifetime, not after it.
Exactly. But it will only change if we use our voices. It
Correct?
will
Yeah.
only change. And not everyone is in a place to do that. And maybe if they're not in the place now, they will be in that place in 6 months, a year, 2 years. They just
Mhm.
need to continue on that journey. But we need to surround ourselves, like you were mentioning, with a community of like minded people who make us feel seen, who don't bring shame to the equation and just allow us to show up as our full, complete, whole self, acknowledge who we are, and encourage one another to move forward and just do our best for one another. And I love what you're doing. I want to also talk about, because it's so amazing to do this for those of us that have already experienced abuse in our lives and are coping with learning how to grow through and move on from that abuse in the way that we can. But it's
Mhm.
also important to create a world that's safer for people who maybe haven't been abused yet. And how do we create actionable change in that way? And so I'd love to hear what you're doing with that and with the charities that you work with.
Yeah. So I I think 2 points there. The first point is I believe that the more vocal people who have been through trauma are about their trauma, inevitably those voices will land in the ears of those who haven't been through trauma, and it just helps them become more knowledgeable and aware on maybe red flags to their own kids, or just
Mm,
actually be aware of what does happen in this world and create better and safer spaces for their own future generations to come. So I think it will have a domino effect and compound around. But on top of that, uh, I have two charities. I'm a co-founder of a charity in America called We Rescue Kids, and essentially what we do is we provide mental health care, so therapists, to child survivors of abuse. So we pay for the mental health care, we pay for the therapist time, we match them up with the child. So that's what we do with We Rescue Kids. And then I'm on the board of a charity here in the UK called We Together. And what we're doing there, the ultimate goal is two. One is to increase the prosecution rates of pedophiles and sex offenders, and
mm-hmm,
the other one is to help victims and survivors, to empower them to report what they went through.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, because a lot of times it's very scary to go to the police, especially when there's not a lot of trust in the world that if you go to the police that actually, one, going to take it seriously and not just fob you off with the, why didn't you come to us sooner? You know, but there's a lack of proof. So there's not enough funding to take it to trial because there's a lack of proof. And then ultimately, let's just say it does get to trial, then there's no conviction because there's a lack of proof. So what we basically are creating with We Together is this reporting tool that is separate from the police. It's not police run, but it helps survivors to basically anonymously report what they went through. And behind the scenes, we are looking for similarities amongst these submissions. And then if and when there's similarities in two or more stories, a cluster gets formed. And then that gets sent to like the middleman, who then decides, okay, what police borough, what police organization should we send this to for them to look at and start an investigation? Because now no longer is it one voice, it's the voices of many. Because as we know, someone who abuses, very rarely are they abusing just one person.
Right. Wow, that is incredibly powerful. That's amazing.
Yeah.
How can people find resources so that they can report? Where would they go to do that?
So we are very, very soon, within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we are going to be test piloting our system with a group of survivors, make sure that it's good and working. And then from there, then a tech team then turns that into a more polished version to then go out for a larger testing group. Then once that's done, and then it goes out to the public. So for that specifically is a waiting game.
Yeah.
But for other people, I mean, if you can, just, I've spoken to so many people before they've gone to the police, kind of asking for permission from me to, Perry, is it the right thing to do to go to the police? And I've had loads of people who've gone to the police and it's been successful. It's fantastic. Loads of people who've gone to the police and haven't been successful. The only thing I can say is this, is that if you can, step into your power and go to the police to report what happened. At the same time, this is going to be very difficult to do. But at the same time, detach yourself from the outcome of what that means and what will happen. Because that is outside your control. What is inside your control is going to the police and say, this happened to me X amount of years ago. That's within your control. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be your closure. That should be your proof to you that you have done what you possibly can. Anything else is outside your control. And again, I know it's hard because you're going to the police for an outcome. That's why you're going there. But at the same time, tell yourself that it's like almost as like me going to the police is a conviction in here. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. And if it does happen in the physical world, fantastic. But again, it's outside your control.
Yes, that is so powerful. And it brings me back to the point that you made about the importance of telling your story in safe spaces, and also becoming detached from the outcome and becoming more attached to, this is my story, I own it, I share it, regardless of how it is received. And that takes healing to get to that point. But I think what happens, and it's something that we need to work on as a society, as really a global society, about how we respond with shame and blame to most uncomfortable things that we are faced with, including sexual assault, especially of children, in part not because we're necessarily bad people, but because we don't want it to have happened. So our brain, it can't handle the cognitive dissonance of something that it can't believe has happened. And so it pushes back. But what happens to the victim, in my assessment in these moments, is something happens to them as a very young child. Maybe when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, when they're really not able to cope with it and take responsibility for their feelings yet, right? They are reliant on the adults in their life to validate them, to tell them what is normal and right and wrong. they share their stories and they're met with shame, hold that in, don't tell the story. And then that becomes almost, well, I guess it's my fault. If I'm not allowed to talk about it, and if I'm being, in a sense, punished and contained, my response to it, the natural response of a child, because they're very egoistic naturally with their stage of development, is it's my fault. I did something wrong. My response is wrong. And then, because life is life and it's not going to stop challenging us, every time we're faced with an assault of some kind, be it something minor or something major, like another sexual assault or an abusive relationship or a toxic workplace, when we're faced with those challenges, because we have embodied these limiting beliefs about what we deserve and about who's to blame, that affects our lifelong trajectory. And we can end up looking back when we're 40, 50, 60, when we're at a point in our neurological development where we really start to understand the difference between self and other. We take a step back and think, gosh, I just spent the majority of my life living for other people and thinking I deserved every bad thing that ever happened to me. And so I think it's just so incredibly important to help victims from the beginning when it happens, to make sure that they understand this happened to you. It isn't because of you, and it isn't who you are. And that will change very likely the entire trajectory of their life and how they respond to challenges and what they expect for themselves. And so I just am so thrilled to be able to have you here today and talking about the work you do, because it's so critically important, especially things like the We Rescue Kids and We Together, to really on the front end try to help victims, because that's going to impact the trajectory of their lives moving forward.
Absolutely. They say on average, I think it's at the latter end of 30 years, 20 to 30 years. I think it's like 27, 28 years it takes on average for someone, once they've gone through abuse, living in silence and then breaking the silence, sorry. And it's like that 20 to 30 years, if you're lucky enough to not be dead within those 20 to 30 years, fantastic. Like this lovely lady here, My Lost Childhood, her name's Kathy. She's in her 70s and she published this book with us.
Wow.
She lived in silence for over 70 years. Bonkers. Wow. Bonkers. So it's like, yes, absolutely. If we can cut that down, that 20 to 30 year average, to 10 to 20 years, then to 5 to 10 years, and then to a couple of years, and then, I don't know, is it too much to ask for a reality where you break the silence the same day or the next day that it happened? I don't know. But all that I can say is that if it's a 20 to 30 year average right now, then let's just get it to 10 to 20 years. What can we do for that? If kid was being abused 6, 7, 8, can they break the silence by the age of 20? Hopefully, because if not, it's a tough ride in their 20s or 30s. And that's really the pinnacle time where you can actually make something. You can make something of your life at any age, but most people believe that it's a make or break, in the 20s or 30s to actually do something. And if they haven't done something and then they're in their late 30s, early 40s, and then they believe that they're worthy of this life that they're living, one that's below their potential. And it's just not the case. So yeah, 100%.
It's not the case. And any amount of time that you can reclaim as your own and not forfeit to something that was not your fault, that happened to you, is valuable time. Because the thing that we learn as we grow and age is our most precious resource is absolutely our time. So giving people that back is more valuable than just about anything else, and giving them back their sense of self and wholeness and love of themselves, and releasing shame. Perry, thank you so much. I so appreciate you being here on the show and spreading your message and all of the incredibly impactful work you do. I am sure that listeners will take away so much growth from hearing you speak and inspiration. And if you're interested in joining the Power Tribe, you can go to Perry's website. Perry, tell us again your website, and we will have everything in the show notes, resources and everything. But tell us again your website where we can learn more about you, your books, your groups, your mission.
Yeah, anything that you possibly need is going to be on my website, which is iamperrypower.com.
Perfect. And I've gone there, and it is extremely polished and moving. And I love seeing the pictures of members of the Power Tribe and hearing their incredible stories. And I will certainly enjoy reading their books and just seeing all the amazing things that will happen thanks to the good work you're doing.
Amazing. Dr. Shafer, I appreciate you bringing me on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everyone for being here. This may have been a challenging episode for some of you who do have a history of abuse or who know someone that you love that has a history of abuse. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. Again, pause it. If you think someone would benefit from this episode, please share it with, of course, the trigger warning so that they know what they're about to potentially experience. But there is no safety in silence, truly, and there is no growth in silence. And that's why we're so passionate about having these conversations. So thank you so much for being here. Stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.